Oh, remember, this is the party that decided that the best kind of health care for Americans to receive during a deadly pandemic was to inject itself with bleach. This is the party that has followed a leader who once looked up into a solar eclipse without any support over his eyes. So, no, none of this is surprising at all. It just really just goes to underscore that the Republican Party will latch onto anything it can in order to try to obtain power. That's the only thing they care about. It's never been about the issues. It's never been about substance, never been about solution. It's about trying to tap into so many crazy threads that they get those people, motivate those people, incite, excite, and turn those people out. It doesn't really matter what anyone believes. It just matters if they can use these things as these cultural grievances that they've imagined as wedge issues to try to turn out their vote.
Molly, there was this new poll that found 43% of Americans concerned about threats of violence or voter intimidation at polling places. People used to be excited about Election Day. Now they are nervous, if not outright afraid for their safety. How did we get here?
We got here through a lot of Republican politicians saying that there was fraud when there wasn't, and sowing this kind of anxiety with their base. And now, I mean, I would say the difference between, taking, the malaria medicine for COVID and sort of this assault on democracy is that the people who are being hurt here are all of us, right? I mean, and it's really scary. I think it's really problematic. I think that Republican politicians, and if Fox News wanted, Fox News could stop it tomorrow, right? They could say, look, we know the truth. We've seen all of these lawsuits. We've seen proof there were recounts in lots of states. I mean, even Arizona, even the cyber ninjas, remember the cyber ninjas? Even they didn't find fraud. So we know there was no fraud. And if they did that tomorrow, it could save democracy. But, they don't want to do it because they don't want to alienate the base.
And we just, Kurt, we just had Jennifer Jones on, this a woman in Georgia who was trying to vote and told she couldn't cast a ballot early because her validity as a voter had been challenged. She fought it successfully, was able to vote. But for some voters, that might not be an option, especially if they do it close to Election Day, especially if they just don't have the ability to invest the time and the resources needed to challenge that. Is this not a type of voter suppression that is playing out in Georgia right now?
Of course it is. It is a deliberate effort of sabotage by the Republican Party to specifically target minorities and those that they perceive to be less able and less capable of fighting back. I mean, I wish that the media would spend as much time on these issues as they have on all the BS polls that they've spent the last 3 months talking about, because the important thing that everybody really needs to understand is this election is not being fought on the same playing field as the last election, that this election is actually a little bit less fair, a little bit less free. Republicans have gone state by state and codified voter suppression, and it is manifesting itself in ways that the framers of the architects of our government could never have imagined. And I'm afraid of what that's going to mean on election day. I'm afraid about the type of intimidation tactics, the potential for violence, the effort by these people walking around pretending to be vigilante enforcers of voter integrity, and what that type of conflict could mean at the polls. It's like, kind of like you said, Election Day used to be a joyous occasion in this country. People would look forward to it. We would look forward to seeing the people that work the polls that we've seen year after year after year. There's a real sense of community and harmony. Well, that's been obliterated by what the Republican Party is doing right now.
Molly, last week you had charges dismissed against Hervis Rogers, who was a Houston man who, after waiting hours to vote in 2020, was charged with voting illegally while on probation. Rogers says that he was unaware he was doing anything illegal. It is a positive end result, kind of like what we just saw with Jennifer Jones. But unlike hers, his case took years to reach. Is this how the system is supposed to work?
No, I mean, I think Republicans decided they couldn't win on their ideas, so they decided they'd make it harder to vote, right? I mean, they saw, even in 2020, they saw Arizona and Nevada and states that were, and Georgia, states that were traditionally red states, starting to blue. And I think the way they responded to that anxiety was not to try to reach out to those voters, but to make it harder for those voters to vote. And so you have a situation, I mean, look in Florida, Ron DeSantis, did this whole show of voter protection committee where he then arrested a lot of people who didn't even know that they had done anything wrong because they were, for illegally voting. I mean, the idea here is to make it scary to vote and to make it so that people who are worried won't vote. And I think that, that is certainly one of the biggest and scariest things happening in our democracy right now.
Kurt, let me switch gears a bit to a piece that you wrote about the midterms. You wrote, quote, failing to acknowledge the shortcomings of polling, the media are giving the public a false or skewed representation of how competitive this election may be and running the risk of making those predictions a self-fulfilled prophecy. Explain that to us. Walk me through it.
It's interesting because after the 2016 election, we heard about how all the polling was wrong, right? Donald Trump won when he wasn't supposed to. Everybody was shocked. After the 2020 election, once again, we heard how all the polling was wrong. Pollsters themselves conceded they don't really know what to do to adjust things, to make things more accurate. And knowing that there is this pattern of behavior now of polling not matching what the electorate actually ends up doing, every election cycle, we play the same song and dance. We have poll after poll after poll being talked about as if it's accurate, as if it's a real depiction and there's science behind it that somehow is proven, when time and time again, it just isn't. And so we've had this for the better part of a year now, this narrative that a red wave is forming, that Democrats face huge headwinds coming into the election, that it's an almost certainty they're going to lose the majority. And the media ends up playing the role of telling the American people that, well, the election's pretty much over. And I use the analogy of what would you rather watch? Would you rather watch a close game or a blowout game? If you're watching a blowout game on TV, you're going to change the channel. Well, the Democratic equivalent to that is if you're telling the American people this election's pretty much decided, why is anyone going to vote? Why bother even showing up? It can actually have a massive impact on people's behavior and attitudes. And I think the media needs to be a lot more responsible. If we get to election night and it turns out that Democrats win this thing, everyone's going to be sitting around the set going, oh, my God, what a shocker. It's outright. I can't believe all the polling was wrong. How many times are we going to play that song and dance before we change it up?
Yeah, no, it's a good point.